Hello, my name is Nora. At our family BBQ, my own mother laughed and said I'd never have the drive my sister did. My father joined in, calling me the family philosopher, a joke at 32. My sister smirked, raising her glass, bragging she had an interview at Sterling the next morning. Everyone applauded her, while I sat near the trash bins, erased from the story yet again. But what happens when the one they called useless is the CEO waiting upstairs, and the sister who mocked me has to beg for a job? The sun was dipping lower in the Dallas sky, laying a golden glaze across my parents' backyard. The smell of brisket and hickory smoke rolled through the air, mixing with the sweet tang of barbecue sauce and the chatter of relatives. On the surface, it looked like the kind of gathering most families dream about. Children chasing each other across the lawn, aunts laughing over glasses of sweet tea, cousins hovering around the grill waiting for ribs. Yet to me, it wasn't comfort, it was a stage. I had stood on it many times before, and I knew my part well, the silent figure in the corner, the one everyone pretended to acknowledge but never truly saw. I sat on a folding chair near the edge of the patio, a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand. To anyone else, this might have felt like a celebration, but for me it was just another reminder that family gatherings were less about love and more about reputation. I could already hear the familiar rhythm, the praise showered on Valora, my younger sister, followed by the subtle barbs aimed my way. In America, families love to brag at BBQs. It's less about food, more about status. Mine was no exception. The smoke rising from the pit wasn't the only thing that stung. The words would follow soon enough. Uncle Ray stood by the grill, calling out names as people came forward for plates. He squinted down at the paper. Valora Ames, here's yours. Merrick Vaughn, right there. Cassandra Holt, there you go. And Norma? I stiffened. Norma, not Nora. My name had been printed wrong on the invitation list, again. A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. Aunt Lillian chuckled and said loudly, Well, at least they remembered you, Norma. Better than being left off altogether, right? I smiled politely, though inside it felt like a punch. These weren't accidents anymore. They were patterns. A lifetime of little erasures, each one small enough to dismiss, but together they formed a wall of dismissal. I had learned long ago that people could erase you without ever saying you didn't exist. All it took was a wrong name, a cropped photo, or a laugh passed around like dessert. Valora, glowing as always in a sundress that looked straight off a magazine page, raised her glass of Cabernet and stood tall in the center of the patio. I'd like to make a little toast, she announced. The conversations hushed, all eyes turning toward her as if on cue. She smiled that perfectly rehearsed smile, the one that had fooled teachers, professors, and apparently our entire extended family. Here's to my little sister Nora, she said, drawing out my name with deliberate sweetness, still searching for a real job. The laughter was instant, rolling across the yard. Even my father chuckled, shaking his head as if it were the funniest line of the evening. She's our family's philosopher, he added, raising his tongs like a conductor's baton. More laughter. I sat motionless, my glass steady in my hand. The smart move was silence. Not because I was weak, but because answering would only feed the script they had already written for me. Silence is sometimes the best armor. It makes their words echo back to them louder. My face remained calm, though inside I felt the old bitterness rising like smoke from the pit. I refused to let them see it. It had been this way for as long as I could remember. Valora, the golden child, Harvard graduate, social darling, always framed as the one carrying the family legacy. And me, the black sheep, the disappointment who had chosen her own path. They laughed at my independence, scoffed at my consulting work, dismissed my career as a hobby. Humiliation disguised as humor was the family's favorite trick, a way to keep me in my place without ever admitting cruelty. As I listened to the laughter fade into smaller conversations, I thought of Eleanor Roosevelt's words, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." It wasn't comfort exactly, but it was a reminder. They could mock me, but they couldn't define me. Valora leaned closer as the chatter picked back up, her glass hovering near her lips. "Relax, sis," she murmured with a smirk, just loud enough for me to hear. "You'll always be the funny story at our BBQs." I smiled faintly, not giving her the satisfaction of reaction. Inside, my voice was steady, clear. "They think I'm a joke. Tomorrow, they'll beg me for a chance." As the sun dipped lower, strings of lights blinked on across the patio, bathing the yard in a warm glow. The energy shifted with it, the noisy clatter of kids chasing each other and adults hovering over the grill gave way to clusters of relatives holding wine or beer, leaning closer now that the air had cooled. I had been to enough of these gatherings to know that this was the moment when casual chatter turned into a kind of performance. For some families, the dinner table is where secrets spill. In mine, the backyard became a stage, and everyone had their part to play. I noticed Valora straighten her dress, running a hand over her hair as she prepared to stand. She thrived under this golden hour spotlight, and she knew it. My role, as always, was different. While she polished her image for applause, I braced myself for the script I had been forced into for decades, the foil, the one to measure her brilliance against. My seat that evening only underlined the point. While Valora sat at the center table flanked by admiring relatives, I had been directed to a chair by the cooler near the trash bins. My cousin Jeff grinned when he saw me sit down and said loudly, "Best seat in the house, huh? You don't even have to get up for ice." Laughter trickled through the group as if he had told a clever joke. I forced a smile, but I knew the sting wasn't just in the words. From there, it began again, as it always did. Requests disguised as casual. "Nora, could you grab another beer?" "Sweetheart, we're out of napkins. Would you mind?" Each trip I made to the cooler or the kitchen was another reminder of my place in their eyes, not as an equal, but as someone convenient. I carried the plates, fetched the drinks, delivered the extras, all while Valora sat basking in admiration. I told myself what I always did in those moments. Small humiliations add up, but I don't need to give them the satisfaction of seeing them land. Instead of flaring up, I noted each detail, quietly adding it to the archive in my mind. When the voices quieted and glasses lifted, I knew the next act had begun. My mother, Cassandra, rose slowly with her wine in hand. She had the same way of commanding attention Valora had perfected, though hers came with age and authority. "I want to take a moment," she began, her eyes glistening in the glow of the patio lights, "to recognize the pride of this family." She turned toward Valora, her smile stretching wider. "She is everything a mother could dream of. Ambitious, successful, admired, a daughter who makes us proud every single day." Applause broke out instantly. My sister lowered her gaze in mock humility, though her lips curled in a smirk she didn't bother to hide from me. Then came the sting, delivered with calculated pause. "Some of us still haven't found direction, but Valora shows what drive looks like. She sets the standard." A louder round of applause followed, like punctuation. I sat silently, my glass of iced tea cold against my palm. My father Merrick added his contribution with a chuckle. "We raised a star and a philosopher." His voice carried the cadence of a joke, but the undertone was sharp. More laughter. Inside, I steadied myself. They thought they defined me with these words. They thought their narrative was fact. But as I sat in that chair by the trash bins, I reminded myself it wasn't true. Their applause was not truth. It was theater, Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's those who build you up, not break you down. I studied Valora as the noise swelled again. She glowed under the validation, intoxicated by the clapping hands, the nodding smiles. She was addicted to approval, and though they praised it as strength, I saw it for what it was, weakness disguised. Anyone who needs applause to know who they are will crumble the moment the clapping stops. I breathed evenly, steadying myself with a line that had carried me through darker nights. Still, like air, I'll rise. Maya Angelou's words weren't just poetry, they were a shield. They reminded me that even in the middle of humiliation, I was not broken. As I stared across the table, Valora leaned toward me with that same knowing grin. She whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Don't worry, sis. One day you'll find something real to do." I didn't answer. My hand gripped the glass of water tighter, condensation wet against my skin. Instead, I breathed deeply, drawing strength not from their laughter, but from the calmness inside me. They called it love, but it felt more like theater. Tomorrow, the curtain would drop. The sound of laughter didn't die down after my mother's toast. If anything, it seemed to echo longer than usual. Every chuckle, every clink of glass felt as though it was bouncing directly off me. I had grown accustomed to being the contrast in the family narrative, the shadow that made Valora's light appear brighter. It was a role I never auditioned for, but one they assigned me without hesitation. I sipped from my glass of water, the ice nearly melted, listening to the hum of approval surrounding her. My sister leaned back in her chair, basking in the glow of attention, the corners of her lips curled in quiet triumph. I caught her glance, that look of victory, and I felt the familiar heaviness settle in my chest. Laughter feels heavier when it's built on someone's silence, and in this family, my silence had been the foundation of their amusement for years. The sound of clapping and the buzz of praise sent me back to another memory, one that still hung, literally, on the wall of my parents' home. I remembered the family reunion photo from nearly a decade ago. Everyone had dressed in their Sunday best for that picture. We stood in rows across the front yard, grandparents in their chairs, cousins kneeling in front, the adults behind them. I had been there, standing at the far right in a pale blue dress. When the photo came back from the printer, though, my body had been cropped out of the frame. The glossy picture was proudly displayed in the living room, framed and hung above the mantel. Every smile was perfectly captured, except mine, which had been sliced away as though it never existed. I had pointed it out once, my voice quiet but firm. "I was there, you know." An uncle had laughed, brushing it off. "It's fine, Nora. You're still in the memory, even if you're not in the picture." Still in the memory. Not in the picture. That sentence followed me every time I visited. I'd walk past the mantel and see them all smiling, frozen in time, while I lingered somewhere just beyond the edge, invisible. A picture is worth 1,000 words, but silence writes the captions. Back in the present, I blinked away the recollection as another wave of laughter rippled through the tables. My aunt, glass of white wine in hand, leaned forward, her voice pitched loud enough to carry, "Well, if nothing else, Nora will make a great babysitter for Valora's kids one day." The group erupted again, this time with what they thought was harmless fun. Some shook their heads as though it was just affectionate ribbing, but to me it landed like another dismissal stamped on my forehead. Valora smirked, tilting her glass toward me in mock acknowledgement, enjoying the hierarchy on full display. She didn't have to say anything. The smugness on her face told the whole story. So my life is reduced to serving her future, I thought. No matter what I had accomplished, their words always folded me back into the same box, the one who supports, who fetches, who is tolerated but never celebrated. I recognized the pattern. These weren't offhand remarks, they were tactics, carefully repeated over years to keep me in my place. The babysitting comment wasn't just a joke. It was a declaration that my role would always be secondary, that my future was tethered to her shadow. I straightened my back slightly, refusing to let them see the sting. Instead, I leaned into my composed exterior, the armor I had been forced to forge long ago. Anger would only confirm their narrative. Silence rewrites it. As I scanned the faces around me, I noticed the way everyone laughed a little too loudly, drank a little too quickly. In American families, teasing often masks cruelty, and elders rarely admit the harm. They call it love, but it is closer to control. I took note of every word, almost like evidence, cataloging each jab for the day when the truth would finally surface. I allowed myself a small, private smile. They thought babysitting was all I was good for. The irony wasn't lost on me. Soon, they would discover that I wasn't here to babysit dreams. I was here to build them. I set my empty glass on the table, the last cube of ice dissolved to water. Across the yard, Valora laughed freely, her voice rising above the rest. I studied her carefully, not with envy, but with certainty. They had cropped me out of photos, cropped me out of toasts, cropped me out of their narrative for years. But tomorrow, I would crop her out of destiny. By the time the cicadas had begun their evening chorus and the string lights glowed brighter across the yard, the party had moved into its sentimental phase. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, but the attention shifted from the food to speeches and acknowledgments. People carried their second or third glasses of wine, voices lowered into that mix of nostalgia and pride families often fall into when the night deepens. I knew the rhythm well. It was when gifts were paraded, when stories of legacy and sacrifice were told, always with an angle that cast Valora in the best possible light. My father Merrick clinked his glass with a fork to quiet the crowd. "I want everyone's attention for a moment," he said, his voice booming with a practiced warmth. Behind him, a sheet had been pulled back to reveal the gleaming new golf simulator, towering over the patio like some shrine to leisure. Guests clapped, impressed by its extravagance, murmuring to one another about the cost, the detail, the sheer indulgence of it. I sat very still, my heart pacing differently from theirs. That gift was mine, quietly purchased, arranged with care, paid for in full without a word of credit sought. It had been meant as a gesture, something just between my father and me, though he had no idea it had come from me. I wanted him to have it, to enjoy something modern and playful in his later years. I expected nothing in return, but I did not expect what came next. My mother, Cassandra, rose gracefully with her wine in hand, her smile poised and triumphant. "We must thank Valora," she announced, placing a hand on my sister's shoulder. "She bought this for her father. Isn't it extraordinary?" The applause erupted instantly. Guests cheered, some whistled. Valora tilted her head, feigning humility, but her eyes sparkled as they met mine across the space. She accepted the praise as though it were her birthright. I could hear the comments swirling around me. "That's why she's the star of this family," one cousin whispered. "Always so generous, so thoughtful." I held my breath, my glass of water cool but heavy in my hand. My stomach clenched as the words I would never say burned inside me. In this family, truth was optional if it made the golden child shine brighter. Even my sacrifices, quiet, deliberate, costly, were consumed, repackaged, and presented as hers. I didn't speak. I didn't stand. I simply sat, stunned, my silence thick in the air. To fight it here, in front of them, would only confirm what they wanted, that I was jealous, bitter, lesser. So I absorbed it, every clap, every nod, every congratulatory pat Valora received on the back. I sat still while my gift was stolen in plain sight. My father, swelling with pride, lifted his glass high. "To Valora," he declared. "For her generosity, her vision, her devotion to this family. We couldn't be prouder." She carries the family legacy forward. Another wave of applause surged, and again my name was absent. Not a mention, not a glance. The toast wasn't just words, it was a verdict. It framed Valora as the sole bearer of success and erased me entirely, like I was never even in the frame. I felt her eyes on me then. Valora's smirk widened, deliberate, locking with mine as if to say, "You see? Even your gifts are mine now." She took a triumphant sip of her wine, while I sipped water that had gone flat. The contrast stung almost more than the lie itself. Applause can be louder than truth, and sometimes silence is sharper than protest. Inside, I repeated that line to myself, steadying the anger that wanted to erupt. I didn't rise, didn't shout, didn't expose them. Because I knew the truth didn't need this stage. The truth had a stage of its own, far grander, waiting for the right time. I remembered an old American saying my grandfather once used, "Don't tell me who you are, show me." That phrase echoed now, guiding me. Their validation meant nothing compared to the reality I carried privately. I had built something no one here could imagine, something stronger than their applause or their dismissals. As Valora basked in the glow of praise that wasn't hers, I made a quiet vow to myself. I would never again seek acknowledgement in this yard, under these lights, within this family that thrived on rewriting the story. My validation had already been written elsewhere, signed in contracts, etched in headlines, whispered in boardrooms. They just hadn't seen it yet. When the applause faded and the clinking of glasses slowed, I leaned back slightly, whispering to myself so softly no one else could hear, "They toast her tonight. Tomorrow, the world will know who built the table they're sitting at." After the applause over Valora's supposed generosity subsided, the yard seemed to shift into a smug afterglow. Small groups formed, circling around my sister like planets orbiting a star. Glasses clinked, voices buzzed, and everywhere I turned, I caught the same refrain. "She's extraordinary. She's the pride of the family." I sat quietly, studying their faces, listening to the cadence of their praise. It was remarkable how quickly exclusion had become normal, how effortlessly my absence was woven into their narrative. When a lie is repeated long enough, it feels like truth. I could hear it happening in real time. Every word another stitch in a fabric designed to keep me on the outside. And then my mother struck again, her voice calm, casual, yet edged like a blade. She leaned toward a cluster of relatives near the patio and said loud enough for me to hear, "If only Nora had half the ambition of her sister, she'd be somewhere by now." A chorus of chuckles followed. Valora's face glowed, drinking in the attention like fine wine. I stared down at the condensation dripping from my glass of water, letting the remarks settle like ash in my chest. They called it tough love, but love doesn't belittle. It builds. I could see what was happening for what it was. Not guidance, not encouragement, but projection. My mother's words weren't about my shortcomings. They were about her need to frame Valora as the victor, even if it meant branding me as the failure. I looked across the yard, watching the applause ripple again as though her remark were gospel. Inside, I told myself to stay calm. Anger would feed them. But the sting was sharp all the same, especially because I knew so many in America had lived this scene, a parent who compared, who wielded shame as though it were discipline. I straightened in my chair, breath steady, trying to frame it differently. She's wrong, but she'll never admit it. And maybe that's her wound, not mine. For a moment, I thought about speaking up, about breaking the script. My hand loosened around the glass, my voice rising just enough to be heard. But as soon as I began, Cassandra cut me off with a gesture I knew all too well. She waved her hand dismissively, her bracelets catching the patio lights. "Not now, Nora. Adults are talking." The words hit harder than the toast, harder than the stolen gift. The group laughed again, some shifting uncomfortably but not enough to resist the tide. 32 years old, but still reduced to a child when they wanted me silent. I felt the old humiliation rush back, the years of being hushed, of being treated as though my voice was ornamental, never essential. My mother's dismissal was a reflex, one she used not only to silence me, but to remind everyone watching that I was unworthy of the spotlight. Valora leaned toward me then, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Don't take it personal, sis. We all know you mean well." She smiled sweetly as though she'd offered me comfort, but her words tightened the noose. I caught the glimmer in her eyes, the thrill of watching me boxed in. Inside, something shifted. This was the line, the one I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. I let the laughter pass, let the chatter return, and I drew myself inward. Silence now is not weakness, it's a weapon. My choice not to erupt wasn't surrender, it was strategy. They thought I was silent because they had defeated me. In truth, I was silent because I was preparing. I thought of an old proverb I'd once read: respect isn't given by age, it's earned by action. My family had mistaken years for wisdom, applause for authority, but neither could disguise the hollowness of their cruelty. I knew then that I would never again let them dictate my worth. This humiliation would not repeat, not in this form, not in this place. Tonight, they silenced me. Tomorrow, I would make sure the silence belonged to me. I lifted my eyes across the table, locking with Valora's. She smirked, assuming victory. I didn't return the smile. Instead, I let my gaze harden, cold but steady. They silence me tonight, I told myself, gripping the glass of water with calm resolve. Tomorrow, they'll hear me without a word. The night had grown heavier. The string lights twinkled above the patio, their glow now competing with the dimming embers of the grill. The earlier cheers and toasts had given way to smaller clusters of chatter, wine-fueled laughter punctuated by the occasional burst of a cousin's story. I sat with my glass of water, the ice completely gone, staring at the reflection of the bulbs rippling across its surface. It should have ended there. Quiet small talk, people packing leftovers, hugs at the door. But Valora wasn't done. She had found a new stage, one with a wider audience than the backyard. She pulled out her phone, angling herself toward the best light, the golf simulator gleaming in the background. A cousin leaned in, laughing as Valora hit record. Moments later, my phone buzzed with a notification I didn't need to open to know what it was. I glanced around the tables, younger cousins already scrolling, whispering, showing each other screens with stifled giggles. "Family BBQ," Valora's voice rang in the clip. "So proud to be the real success story here." She added hearts and sparkles, her favorite digital garnish. And in the tags, every relative's name appeared, except mine. They laughed and nodded, tapping the heart button, sharing in her curated truth. I didn't need to look at the screen to know my erasure had just been immortalized. In this era, exclusion isn't just in person, it's archived online, a record that outlives the evening. I thought of the older relatives, the ones who avoided social media, who might never see the post. And then I thought of the younger ones, their phones lighting up, watching Valora's narrative spread in real time. I felt my identity vanish twice, once in the backyard, once in the digital cloud. The final straw came swiftly. Valora leaned back, laughing as she refreshed her screen to see the likes climbing. She glanced at me with that smirk I had known since childhood. "Don't worry, Nora," she said casually, her voice carrying across the yard. "I'll make sure you're included when you actually achieve something worth mentioning." A few chuckles followed, soft, embarrassed laughs from relatives who didn't know whether to join in or look away. My father smirked, shaking his head like it was harmless fun. I held the glass tighter, the moisture dripping down my palm. My patience had melted, just like the ice. Inside, my resolve crystallized. Every silence is an investment. Tonight, I had invested more than enough. Tomorrow, the return would be unforgettable. I sat a moment longer, letting the voices blend into background noise, until I knew it was time. I placed the glass gently on the table and rose. My movements drew a few curious glances, but no one stopped me. They assumed, as always, that my departure meant nothing. I walked toward the gate, gathering my bag, when my mother's voice cut through the air like a blade. "At least Valora stays for family," she said. The words stopped me mid-step. The implication wasn't just about attendance, it was about loyalty, belonging, blood. To her, my leaving meant betrayal, while Valora's theft and cruelty were devotion. Then Valora delivered the dagger. She raised her voice, making sure the entire patio heard. "It's sad, really. She never belonged here." Laughter followed, quick and shallow, then faded when they realized I didn't turn back. I didn't argue, didn't plead. I simply walked, each step calm, measured. Sometimes the most powerful statement is leaving the stage before the curtain falls. The night air was cooler beyond the gate, quieter. I reached my car, slid into the driver's seat, and sat still for a moment, staring at the Dallas skyline. Towers of light rose against the dark, glittering like something untouchable. But I knew better. I knew those towers weren't untouchable. One of them bore my name, even if hidden from theirs. "Tomorrow," I whispered to myself, gripping the steering wheel, "that same skyline will look different to them, because they'll see it through me." I thought of Martin Luther King Jr.'s words I had once underlined in a worn paperback. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Justice wouldn't arrive by chance. Mine had been built brick by brick, contract by contract, silence by silence. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught one last sound, the faint echo of Valora's laughter, bleeding into the night. It trailed after me, hollow, distant, already weaker than it had been in the yard. They think my silence is surrender. Tomorrow, they'll learn its strategy. The party had quieted into a different rhythm. The laughter that once shook the yard now dulled into small circles of conversation, punctuated by the clinking of ice in glasses and the yawns of children who had played themselves into exhaustion. I sat off to the side, where shadows stretched long across the lawn. From my chair I could see Valora still commanding attention, her voice carrying, her gestures theatrical, as if the evening had been staged for her alone. I thought of how easily cruelty passed itself off as tradition in this family. Teasing became habit, habit became culture, and culture became the law of the yard. I was supposed to sit, smile, and let it wash over me, again and again. But silence doesn't erase pain. It preserves it. It lingers, waiting for its day of release. Tonight, even as the party dimmed, I knew there would be one more strike before the night ended. It came in the form of my uncle, Cassandra's brother, already loosened by his third whiskey. He leaned back in his chair, puffing his chest, and said casually, "Nora, if you're looking for something steady, I could always use a helper at my store. Cash register's not hard, and you'd finally have something real to do." Laughter cracked open the quiet. Some laughed hard, genuinely amused, while others chuckled nervously, not sure if joining in made them cruel too. My uncle didn't care. He grinned at his own wit, as if he'd delivered a gift. To them, I thought, my years of work mean less than a cashier's shift. Before I could even react, Valora leaned in, her tone sweet but sharpened to a point. "See, Nora, options are out there if you're willing to be realistic." She gave a pitying smile, the kind she saved for moments she wanted to humiliate me without appearing vicious. Merrick, my father, smirked and nodded, raising his glass in agreement. The validation landed harder than the joke. My chest tightened, though my face remained calm. I didn't argue. Not yet. Inside, the sting dug deeper than I wanted to admit. They had taken everything I built, reduced it to a punchline, a fallback, a safe job that wasn't mine and never would be. And once again, Valora claimed the spotlight, untouchable, gilded by their approval. I sat still, breathing deeply, when suddenly I felt a presence at my side. Elira, my 12-year-old cousin, slipped quietly into the chair next to me. She looked around, making sure no one else paid attention, then leaned close. Her voice was soft, nearly a secret. "I like you more than Valora. You're real." I blinked, startled. Children didn't break ranks in this family. They followed the current, clapped when told, smiled for photos whether they meant it or not. But Elira's words landed like an anchor dropped into deep water. Someone saw me. Maybe small, maybe quiet, but real. I turned to her, studying her earnest face, the innocence in her eyes. For the first time that night, the tension in my chest loosened. "Thank you," I whispered back, my voice steadier than I felt. She smiled shyly, then darted away before anyone could notice she had chosen sides. I watched her rejoin the children, my thoughts circling. It takes the innocent to see through the noise. Her words replayed in my mind, like a thread pulling tight. They had mocked me, erased me, pushed me down all night, and yet one voice of truth was enough to silence a chorus of lies, if I let it fuel me. I sat taller, letting the humiliation and the hope mingle into something stronger. Tonight hadn't been about love or unity. It had been a test, a declaration of the roles they believed we were bound to. Valora the star, me the shadow. But Elira's whisper reminded me I had a choice. The night had shown me clearly. I would never belong in the script they had written. I would never be the character they wanted. And I was done trying. I rose slowly, my bag in hand. Elira caught my eye across the yard, and though she said nothing, she smiled, squeezing her hands together as though holding on to the secret between us. "They offer me scraps of dignity," I thought, steadying myself as I walked toward the gate. "Tomorrow, I'll offer them truth." Morning light crept through the blinds, sharp and clear, erasing the haze of the night before. I sat on the edge of my bed, fully awake long before the alarm clock was set to ring. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I didn't need to check to know who was filling my feed. Valora had already begun. Her voice carried from a short clip. "Manifesting my CEO life today. #future boss." She stood in front of her mirror, hair curled, blazer pressed, holding her phone high while tilting her head for the best angle. She repeated mock interview questions, exaggerating her confidence, every movement practiced for applause. I watched for a few seconds, then set the phone down. She doesn't prepare for reality, I thought. She prepares for applause. I had seen it for years, her talent for performance, for creating a version of herself just polished enough to be admired. The screen didn't capture substance, it captured showmanship. Scrolling through her stories, I saw comments pouring in from relatives and friends, heart emojis, "So proud of you," messages, encouragement that fueled her image further. It was generational theater, a display that blurred truth with presentation. Older viewers might shake their heads at the vanity of it all, but I saw something else, the fragility of someone addicted to attention. When I stepped outside, Dallas felt sharper that morning. The city skyline rose against a pale blue sky, steel and glass catching the sunlight. Today, for me, wasn't just another workday. It was the reckoning. At Sterling headquarters, Valora made her arrival loud. A rented luxury car gleamed in the reserved VIP spot, its polished exterior meant to match her persona. She emerged from it with sunglasses perched high, her phone already in hand. She strutted across the plaza, pausing in front of the Sterling logo etched in marble to take a series of selfies. A cousin, tagging along as her support, filmed her walking with confidence. Meanwhile, I pulled into the underground garage in my own understated sedan. No one snapped a picture of my arrival. I had no need for it. I parked far from the entrance intentionally, slipping into the shadows as I always had. A real seat at the table doesn't need validation, it commands it. From a distance, I saw her laughing, waving to no one in particular, speaking loudly enough for strangers to overhear. This is it, guys. Big day. Sterling will never be the same after me. The irony was so thick it almost made me smile. Symbolism weighed heavy in that moment. She claimed a space that wasn't hers, while I owned the very building. She performed for the plaza, while my keycard would take me to the highest floor, where power lived quietly. Inside the building, the air was cooler, quieter, purposeful. My heels echoed softly across the polished floor as I entered through the private access. The security guard greeted me respectfully, nodding in a way that confirmed my presence didn't need explanation. Upstairs, staff moved with calm efficiency, pausing to acknowledge me with, "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling." On my way through the lobby, I noticed her downstairs, chatting animatedly with the receptionist. Valora leaned over the counter, using charm and exaggerated friendliness, dropping her resume as though it were gold. She didn't notice me walking past, hidden by the partition of glass and shadow. She thinks proximity is power, I whispered to myself. She has no idea power lives upstairs. Each step carried weight, the kind of weight you feel when years of silence are about to give way to truth. I passed colleagues who nodded, a quiet recognition of my authority that needed no applause. Meanwhile, Valora's voice carried faintly through the air, too bright, too rehearsed, betraying her desperation to be liked before the interview even began. The contrast was almost poetic, her visible performance against my invisible authority, one loud and brittle, the other quiet and unshakable. When I reached the top floor, I paused at the threshold of my office. The glass stretched from wall to wall, offering a panoramic view of Dallas waking up. Cars filled the highways, sunlight struck against mirrored towers, and the city pulsed with the energy of another day. I stepped inside and rested my hand on the desk that had carried countless contracts, decisions, and strategies. From the joke at the BBQ to this, every moment had led here. My silence hadn't been weakness, it had been preparation. Success is the best revenge, I thought, but only when you don't even need to call it revenge. Valora's downfall was already written, she just hadn't read it yet. I drew a slow, steady breath, feeling the moment settle around me. Today, I told myself, silence ends. Valora swept into the interview room as though she already owned it. Her smile was wide, dazzling, rehearsed for the exact effect it had on family, friends, and strangers alike. She extended her hand, gripping too firmly, a handshake designed to impress, but landing as artificial. I watched from above, standing behind a discreet pane of glass in the observation suite. From this vantage point, I could see everything, the slight flinch of one panelist as she squeezed too tightly, the way her eyes darted around the room searching for approval rather than grounding herself in composure. She thought the room was hers before the first question was asked, I murmured to myself. I had seen this performance too many times, the bright entrance, the confidence worn like a costume. For a moment, she almost convinced even herself. But the moment the script faltered, the truth would bleed through. The panel began with simple questions drawn directly from the resume she had so proudly distributed. One of the senior directors asked, "Could you tell us about your experience leading strategic initiatives during your internship at Halberd Company?" Valora launched into an answer smooth on the surface, but beneath it, I heard nothing of substance. "Yes, of course. At Halberd, I spearheaded efforts to increase synergy between departments, focusing on cross-functional collaboration and innovative thinking. She smiled, gesturing with her hands as though conducting an orchestra. The panel nodded politely, but I noticed the subtle shift, an exchanged glance, the first silent flag raised. Her words were polished but hollow, buzzwords without scaffolding. Confidence without content is like a balloon. It only takes one pin. Another panelist asked, "Can you elaborate on what measurable results came from that initiative?" Her eyes flickered for a moment. "Well, the results were clear improvements in morale and team alignment," she answered, still smiling, though the corners of her lips tightened. The panel let it pass, for now, but their pens moved quickly across their notepads. Valora, oblivious, leaned further into her act, layering jargon with a veneer of charm. She didn't hear the silence growing around her. She only heard the applause that had never been there. Then the hard case study came. A seasoned partner leaned forward, voice calm but exacting. "Let's say you're brought in to advise a regional retail chain losing money. Revenue is down, 20% morale is collapsing, and their market competition is aggressive. Walk us through your 90-day turnaround plan." The air in the room thickened. Valora's smile faltered. She blinked rapidly, buying time. "Well," she began, "I believe the best approach is to synergize the existing teams, focus on innovation, and leverage opportunities across departments." The partner did not flinch. "Specifically, what are your first 3 moves?" She repeated herself, circling phrases she thought sounded powerful. Alignment, cross-functional teamwork, innovative restructuring. But her voice lost its rhythm, turning clipped and defensive. I could see it unravel, the tilt of her shoulders, the sweat beginning to gather at her temples. The panel pressed harder, refusing to feed her easy outs. "What cost-cutting measures would you implement immediately? Which key performance indicators would you track first?" She stumbled, shuffled words, contradicted herself in the space of a single sentence. Her confidence thinned into desperation. Watching from above, I felt calm satisfaction. Truth doesn't need applause. It reveals itself in silence. The unraveling was nearly complete when the lead interviewer adjusted his glasses, flipping a page in her resume. "I want to clarify one detail," he said. "Here, under your section on leadership experience, you list Executive Team Lead, Halberd Company. Is that correct?" Valora nodded quickly. "Yes, that's right." He held up a folder. "Our verification with Halberd shows no record of that title. In fact, they confirm you were an intern assisting a senior analyst. Can you explain the discrepancy?" The blood drained from her face. She stammered, words tripping over themselves. "Well, technically, I was assisting leadership, yes, but they often relied on me in a lead capacity, so I—" The panel did not smile. The politeness drained as well. Pens moved faster across paper. Another panelist added, "Inflating a title is a serious concern. We expect absolute accuracy here." Valora's hands trembled slightly as she tried to redirect, but each attempt rang weaker than the last. Her facade was crumbling, brick by borrowed brick. "From my place above," I whispered, "a house built on borrowed bricks collapses under its own weight." She had come to claim a crown, but already the room was stripping away the illusion. Her voice, once loud and sure, now carried the brittle tone of someone unprepared for truth. When the interview ended, she left the room shaken, sweat visible on her brow. Her posture no longer radiated confidence. It sagged under the weight of exposure. I stood still, calm, resolute, watching her retreat. She came for a throne. Instead, she would face the throne she never knew I built. When the interviews wrapped up downstairs, Valora was summoned to the top floor. The assistant delivered the message with a polite smile, telling her the CEO himself wished to meet her personally. I could imagine the rush of triumph swelling inside her. proof in her mind that she had impressed enough to warrant special treatment. Meanwhile, I sat behind my desk in my office, calm, composed, reviewing notes while the skyline stretched behind me in a wall of glass. My assistant knocked once and said quietly, "She's on her way up." For years, they wrote me out of the story. Tonight, they would meet the author. The heavy doors opened, and Valora entered, her eyes immediately captured by the room. She looked up at the sweeping view of Dallas from the top floor, sunlight glinting across the towers. "Oh my God," she whispered, stepping forward. "This office is incredible." She adjusted her blazer, rehearsed confidence snapping back into place. "Mr. Sterling, it's such an honor." I turned the chair slowly, deliberately. When our eyes met, the color drained from her face. "Actually," I said evenly, my voice cutting through the silence, "it's Ms. Sterling." The pause that followed was long, heavy, and complete. No applause, no laughter, just the sound of her breathing sharp and quick. The mic drop moment had arrived. Valora stammered, her words tripping over themselves. This has to be some kind of joke. You? CEO?" I didn't flinch. "Yes. And I've read the full report from your interview." I let the words hang, precise and cold. "Your answers were shallow. Your resume exaggerated. The panel found you unprepared. You failed." Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Her voice shifted, brittle and defensive. "Please, Nora, give me a chance. We're family. I just need one opportunity. I can prove myself if you let me. Please." I leaned forward slightly, every motion calm. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same mouth that had called me a joke now begged me for mercy. "You mocked me in front of everyone," I thought, though I didn't say it out loud. Instead, I let the reversal sharpen on its own. Valora's tone cracked under the weight of desperation. "Don't do this. I need this job. Just help me this once. You have the power. Isn't that what family's for?" Her words hung, pleading, but they carried no substance, no recognition of the years she had contributed to my erasure. I stood slowly, letting the silence stretch. "We don't hire jokes." I said it without anger, only clarity, returning her cruelty in perfect symmetry. Her body recoiled as though struck, her face pale and trembling. She tried to protest, her words dissolving into half-formed sentences, but I lifted a hand toward the door. My assistant stepped forward silently, already understanding. Justice isn't loud, it's precise. As she was escorted out, her heels clicking unevenly against the polished floor, I turned back toward the skyline. Dallas shimmered in the late morning light, indifferent to the collapse that had just unfolded in this room. "They'll all know by tonight," I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. "The crown they mocked me for never wearing, I forged myself." That evening, the sun slipped behind the Dallas skyline, painting the horizon in amber and violet. I sat alone in my office, the city stretched out before me through the wall of glass. The room was quiet, but my phone vibrated on the desk, buzzing with notification after notification. I didn't need to read them to know what they contained. The story had spread. Sterling's secret CEO was me. Across town, relatives were receiving the same flood of messages. A cousin posted on Facebook, "Crazy! The CEO of Sterling is actually Nora?" The comments lit up instantly, shock rolling through the network like a storm. Group texts filled with screenshots, disbelief, questions. My family chat thread, once filled with Valora's curated highlights and my mother's boasts, had gone silent. Arrogance had frozen into astonishment. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded. They couldn't clap when my name was spoken in truth. That silence said more than any applause ever could. The news triggered a memory I had tucked away years ago. I was younger then, eager, full of plans. I had sat across from my mother at the kitchen table, explaining with excitement that I was starting a consulting firm. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses and scoffed. It's just a small hobby, Nora. Real businesses have storefronts, brick and mortar, something people can see. When I tried to explain how strategy and advisory could shape entire industries, she waved me off. Relatives joined in later, calling it temporary, a phase I would outgrow. I remembered the sting of their dismissal, the laughter that followed as though I had confessed a fantasy too childish to be serious. Now, years later, that small hobby had grown into sterling, a powerhouse worth billions, a company leaders across the country sought counsel from. They mistook vision for failure because they couldn't measure beyond their own horizon. While I replayed the memory, the fallout spread through the family circle. Merrick sat in his chair, no jokes left in him, his smirk erased. Cassandra paced the living room, snapping at anyone who dared to ask questions. She was just lucky, she said more than once, her voice sharp, defensive. It's not as though she built it alone. The words betrayed her disbelief, her refusal to face that her narrative had collapsed. Relatives whispered, "Did you know? How could you not know?" Some stared at Valora, who avoided every eye, humiliated. Her face, once lit with triumph, now hung heavy with shame. I imagined their circle that night, the murmurs, the shifting blame, the scrambling to explain what couldn't be denied. They could rewrite the story as many times as they wanted, but the ending belonged to me now. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise a glass to myself. Instead, I reflected with clarity. Revenge doesn't heal, but recognition, earned in silence, frees. I let the weight of that settle. For so many years, I had craved acknowledgement from them, waited for validation that never came. Tonight proved I no longer needed it. Their silence wasn't my loss anymore. It was their burden. I stood, walking to the window, watching the city sparkle in the night. The bitterness was there, yes, but it no longer consumed me. My liberation was quiet, rooted in the knowledge that I had built something enduring. For once, I whispered into the glass, a quiet smile on my lips. The silence is mine, and it feels like peace. The week that followed moved with the pace of wildfire. Every outlet in Dallas had published the headline, "Sterling's secret CEO revealed. It's Nora Vaughn." Business circles buzzed, LinkedIn posts spun with congratulations and shock. My name trended, not Valora's, and in neighborhoods where my family lived, whispers bloomed like weeds. How could they not know? How could her parents, her sisters, sit at the table with her and never see? Cassandra couldn't walk into the grocery store without feeling eyes on her. One of her closest friends reportedly asked, "How could you not know your own daughter's success?" The words spread faster than anything she'd ever boasted about Valora. Merrick withdrew completely, his humor finally cut short by shame. The man who laughed loudest at my expense now kept his head low at the club, unwilling to answer questions from old golf buddies. And Valora disappeared altogether, calls unanswered, messages ignored, her social media dark after years of shining it like a mirror. For once, the world did the talking. I didn't have to. When Cassandra called for a family meeting, I went, not for them, but for myself. She wanted to salvage dignity, perhaps convince herself she was still the matriarch in control of the narrative. Valora slumped in the corner, muttering excuses about the interview being unfair. Merrick sat quietly, wringing his hands, offering the weak comfort of, "We can move past this." I listened, my silence deliberate, calm, unyielding. They wanted me invisible when it suited them. Now they wanted me merciful to soothe themselves. They had no idea mercy was not on the table. I reached into my bag and took out a pen, old, weighty, with a tarnished clip, a pen my father had given me as a child. At the time, he had handed it over with a dismissive smile. "Someday you'll do something small with it. Maybe you'll write letters or keep notes." I placed it on the desk between us. "This pen built sterling," I said, my voice steady. "While you laughed, I wrote my future." The room froze. Valora stared at it, her face pale, her mouth parting as if to speak, but nothing came. Cassandra's lips tightened. She tried to form words, but they stumbled at her throat. Merrick lowered his eyes, the weight of regret pulling his shoulders forward. "You don't get to erase me anymore," I told them, not raising my voice but letting each syllable carry the finality they deserved. No one argued, no one laughed. The silence, once their weapon, was mine now. I stood, pushing the chair back, ending the meeting on my terms. Sometimes justice isn't loud, not cruel. It's simply undeniable. I didn't wait for apologies. I didn't crave recognition anymore. I carried my own. Revenge was never the point. What I wanted was what I now held completely: self-respect, untethered from their approval. As I walked to the door, I left the pen on the table. Let them stare at it. Let them wonder how something so small could write something so vast. Outside, the Dallas evening air felt different. Cool, steady, mine. I stepped onto the street without looking back. They'll remember me, I thought, not as the joke, but as the silence that became power.